focus on what matters.
Welcome to our next installment of Hard Truth series. Today, we're looking at technology. I'm Sarah Kehalani-Gu, the editor-in-chief of Axios, joining you from my home in Washington, D.C. I want to thank Goldman Sachs 1 Million Black Women for making this conversation possible. And I want to welcome you, our audience, joining us today on Facebook, on Twitter, on YouTube, and LinkedIn, and Axios.com. You can join the conversation today on Twitter at Axios or using the hashtag Axios Events. Over the next 30 minutes, I'll be joined by my colleague Ina Fried. And today, we're going to discuss the current inequalities within the tech industry. Our first guest is the CEO of Girls Who Code. Dr. Tarika Barrett joins me from New York, New York. Welcome, Dr. Barrett. It's great to have you with us.
Thank you so much, Sarah. It's a pleasure to be here.
I want to dive right in. Your organization has served 450,000 girls, teaching them important skills that are necessary for jobs of the future in technology. And about half of those, from what I understand, are girls who are from underrepresented groups. I want to ask you the basic question. How do you engage girls in this kind of field and these skills? How do you reach out to them, and what seems to be most successful in engaging them?
Thank you so much, Sarah, for that question. We've been doing this work since 2012, so we're almost a decade old. And we learned that we really have to build early interest in computer science and support students, throughout their entire education. Having more representation of women and people of color in tech in particular can actually be the difference we need to empower a pipeline of young people and girls of color to pursue the tech careers of the future. At Girls Who Code, we always say that you can't be what you can't see. And, when you think about our girls, they learn in school and through culture about men like Bill Gates and Mark Zuckerberg, the Albert Einsteins of the world, Neil Armstrong, but not about the women pioneers in the field like Katherine Johnson or Mary Jackson, Ada Lovelace, Grace Hopper, Jean Bartik. And, your question very much gets at the fact that still for our girls, and especially our girls of color, in their minds, a programmer is a boy in a hoodie, alone in the basement, or a man running a company somewhere in Silicon Valley. And before girls are even 10 years old, they've already internalized these cultural touchstones. And these internalized beliefs actually resonate throughout their entire lives. So these stick with them in elementary, middle, high school, in college, and even into the workforce. And you mentioned that we've reached, 450,000 girls through our programming, 90,000 of whom are college age or workforce age alums, which we're so proud of. And, our programming really spans quite a bit. It starts as early as third grade. And we even have things like online resources that any girl can download. And we spark this interest, right? And engage girls really early in CS. And then we build on that with things like our summer immersion program. And that gets our girls hooked so that they actually choose to pursue computer science in college. And, we've also, especially in response to the pandemic, thought about ways that we continue to drive persistence among our college age and workforce age young women. And so we have things like college loops, Girls Who Code Talks, and a hiring summit, which was very new for us, and a program called Work Prep, because we know that these women actually need support as they prepare to enter the workforce. And, we've come such a long way in helping girls see more, women who look like me in the tech industry, but we need to see more women who look like me at the top of these companies so that girls actually know that there's a pathway for them. So, the bottom line is that we have to make the tech workforce more equitable, but also make computer science education more welcoming and accessible for our girls. And that's what we do at Girls Who Code.
That's such an important point that you make about representation and the images that so many of our young kids get from the media that are really out of our control. But your work, that's why the challenge of your work is important. I want to talk to you a little bit about the pandemic that you mentioned, because we saw so much change in the past couple of years where your programming had to move to remote reality or virtual access. And we know that schools and government spend a lot on broadband, spend a lot on equipment. I want to know, did that make your organization's efforts more difficult or easier? Because I think that some of the rollout of that was uneven. I'm curious to know what that experience was like for you.
That's a great question, Sarah. The pandemic really exacerbated all of these challenges that we had been working on as an organization for close to a decade. And it made these educational inequities that we already understood, it brought them into even starker relief. And your point is right? Folks continue to think about broadband solutions. And certainly we know that the dearth of internet access was a huge issue. But at Girls Who Code, we also thought about what our young people would need in terms of support and just really strong pedagogy. And so we surveyed really early to ask questions about internet access. Do you have a computer at home? Do you have a quiet place to work? Are you taking care of siblings or helping your family work and pay the bills? Because these were the fundamental situations that we found our girls and young women experiencing that don't get completely mitigated by a broadband solution. So I would say it's much more of a yes and in that case. So it was helpful to do that. But it also meant that we designed a truly responsive, what we think is a best-in-class program that was, contemplated synchronous and asynchronous opportunities, group learning, project-based work, shorter days and office hours, and all kinds of wraparound supports to meet the needs of our young women and girls. And then, the other place too was that very early in the pandemic, we found out that 30% of our alums had lost their internship opportunities. And I think 40% of our seniors had lost full-time opportunities. And we had to kind of respond, jump in there. And that's where things like our hiring summit and work prep programs emerged.
Well, yeah, and let's talk about the tech industry, right? I mean, your goal is to address gender parity in the tech business by 2030. That's an ambitious goal, especially with the setbacks of the pandemic, things that you mentioned. I want to talk about that. We look deeply at the numbers here at Axios, at some of the biggest tech companies, some of the biggest employers, Google, Facebook, et cetera. When you look at representation of groups like Black Americans, Hispanic Americans at those companies, it's in the very low single digits. I mean, the progress that we describe as a trickle, I think could be generous, maybe. What do tech companies need to do? Are they investing enough? Are they working with you to address things like that, like a drop off in what happens to the internship program, or just the first entry level type of jobs?
Yeah, Sarah, that's such a good question. And I think what you're getting at is some of the complexity, right? So as we're simultaneously, addressing this growing gender gap in tech and trying to prepare our girls and young women for these thriving, exciting careers of the future, we also know that it's within an industry that continues to sometimes be the source of negative news and troubling instances of discrimination. And so much of this is that we have to, at Girls Who Code, we try to really work closely, with our corporate partners. Some of them, are tech, many of them are tech companies inherently. And, we try to have a much deeper, complex conversation about what this means. And, one of the things that has to happen is that we have to ensure that Black and Brown students are considered for internship and entry level jobs in these companies, right? And I've talked about this in other settings, but one thing that I've really tried to highlight in terms of what more can be done is frankly, the elitist system of academic credentialing, right? That offers this narrow and privileged perspective of success that just continues to shut out historically marginalized students. And the result is that we just don't bring this much needed diversity to these tech companies. And these are coming from real conversations, right? Where I've come to understand the over-reliance on four-year university degrees, typically from Ivy League institutions. And we know that hurts not only our young people, right? Especially young people of color, but the tech companies overall. And as you mentioned, at the outset, Girls Who Code, in terms of who we serve, half of them are from historically underrepresented communities. These are women who are motivated, ready to learn, but don't always have the same opportunities. They might be working multiple jobs while, carrying a full course load. They have to balance homework and caregiving, or they don't have the same resources in their communities. And so the irony here is that you have these young women who are the embodiment of bravery and resilience, the very qualities that these tech companies are desperate to add to their workforce, but are not necessarily reflected in the conventional academic credentials that the tech firms overwhelmingly are obsessed with. And the other point here is that it's self-defeating, right? Computer science, these are the jobs that are the fastest growing, highest paying in our economy, expected to grow 11% between 2019 and 2029, which will translate into 500,000 new jobs. So two things are true. These companies can't afford to leave an ounce of tech talent on the table. And for our young people, as much as we might be frustrated with the tech industry and some of the behavior we see, there's no opting out of tech for them. So we have to diligently support them in being able to be successful.
Some really good points too, especially right now in today's economy when there's such a high demand for workers, such a high demand for skilled workers in a lot of these fields. And with the pandemic, we don't see that ending anytime soon, and employers have to kind of rethink what are the job requirements to do the job. This has been a great conversation with you, Dr. Barrett. Thank you so much for joining us today.
Thank you so much, Sarah, for elevating this issue. Such a pleasure.
And next, we're going to turn to our View from the Top segment with our Chief People Officer, Dominique Taylor.
Thank you, Sarah. Now joining us from New York, New York, Chief Operating Officer for Global Investment Research at Goldman Sachs, Giselle George Joseph. Welcome, Giselle.
Hi, Dominic. Nice to be with you.
Giselle, we're discussing how inequities within hiring practices in the tech industry lead to inequities in product development, machine learning, and more. Please tell us about your work on the Black Womenomics research report, as well as some of the discoveries that your team made.
So what we confirmed in our research, Black Womenomics, is both how foundational Black women are to our households. Black women, I think we know that, but I think it was great to sort of validate that in the research. But Black women are really important to the well-being of our economy. They are running small businesses. They are essential workers. They are often breadwinners in their families. But we also saw how disadvantaged Black women continue to be really on a broad range of economic measures that are really needed to thrive in this country. And so what we focused on a lot was investing in the underinvested is what we call it. I think, look, before we can even get into a conversation on getting, job creation or building wealth, we looked at just the basics. A third of the homes where Black women live are estimated to be unhealthy. We're talking rodents, leaks, peeling paint, no working smoke alarm in the house. We talk about health. Black women have 3 times the pregnancy-related mortality rate than white women. And Dominic, you mentioned I live in New York. In New York, that number is 10x. Now we talk about education, and 6 decades after Brown and versus Board of Education, 70% of Black students still attend a school where the majority of students are non-white. So all of this have really broad repercussions for Black women and very large negative impact on college graduation rates, on the labor market, and ultimately on our life outcomes.
And what are the public and private investment opportunities that you discovered that could help close the wealth and opportunity gaps for Black women?
So closing the gaps, there's so many gaps. It requires really a commitment across both the public and private sectors. We offer a broad list in the research, but I will say, well, first of all, that the list is hardly exhaustive. And secondly, we tended to focus a lot on the power of private capital in driving change, in part because that's what we have the power over, and that's where we were going to make some impact. But we also highlight strategies that get at the structural barriers that have limited Black women's progress, because it's not an individual thing. It really is a structural thing in a lot of cases. So we looked at providing access to capital for Black women business owners that would really help reduce dependence on more expensive forms of credit and personal savings, for instance, which would really then help grow long-term wealth. We looked at increasing financial education for Black women. Overall, financial wellness just impacts everything that you do, right? Just the ability to make better day-to-day living decisions, budgeting decisions, just managing financial risk. And then thirdly, we looked at a broad category that we called investing in Black communities. I mean, we cannot understate the value of just living in a safe neighborhood, having suitable childcare, ability to access quality healthcare. These are just basics that are needed, not really only to just ensure that Black women can maximize their potential, but really to save lives.
And Giselle, your research was an integral part of the launch of Goldman Sachs's 1 Million Black Women Investment Initiative. Can you tell us about this initiative?
The 1 million Black women, I mean, the name sort of says it all. We're investing 10 billion through the lens of Black women, and then 100 million in philanthropic capital. And really the aim is to narrow opportunity gaps for Black women. And I mentioned before, the gaps are incredibly wide. And so we looked at basically increasing opportunities in key moments in a Black woman's life. So anywhere from, access to quality healthcare before and after giving birth, better school facilities, schools that are better funded, access to loans for college, the ability to be able to buy a home, or, as I mentioned before about homes that are unhealthy, living in a home that isn't unhealthy, that isn't rat infested, saving for retirement, access to funds to start a business. There's just so many areas in the program that we're targeting. So really across the spectrum of healthcare, housing, education, digital connectivity, which in the era of COVID, we've come to realize just how important that is, financial health, and then workforce and job creation. So it's very broad and very inclusive.
That's tremendous. And one of the many reasons that I love working at Axios is that over 60% of the company and the executive team are women. You oversee this $10 billion investment with a team of Black women, which is just extraordinary. So what has that experience been like, and what sort of impact are you seeing just with that group?
Okay, it is incredibly empowering and powerful, I will say, to be part of the program. And I think it really credentializes the firm and what we're trying to do. Representation matters. And it matters in some ways even more when we're trying to find solutions to some really important and really difficult problems. As I mentioned, how wide the gaps are. So I give so much credit to our CEO and to the leadership at the firm for just making a very intentional decision to have so many senior Black women, not just at the firm, but also outside the firm really own this program.
That's fantastic. And then last, what else is Goldman Sachs doing in terms of commitments to job creation and closing racial gaps?
So, to the point that I made earlier, there are so many gaps and so many things that we can focus on. I think our firm has really tried to strengthen commitment in a lot of different areas. But one of the really great things we did this year that was really also very close to my heart was increasing our commitment to historically Black colleges and universities. And again, this is just one example, but again, one that's very close to my heart. So we committed this year $25 million to HBCUs over the next 5 years, basically to help HBCU students across the US with just access to our firm, our people. We created a program called Market Madness, HBCU Possibilities. And it was basically a 4-month training in finance fundamentals. So we got 125 students from eight HBCUs across the US and really spent time teaching them about the firm, teaching them about finance. And at the end, they were able to win money both for themselves and for their schools. We'll do that again next year. And again, as someone who went to undergrad in an HBCU, just the importance of that program and the impact of that program. For those who don't know, HBCUs represent almost 20% of all Black college graduates in the US. So a really significant population for us to be able to target and help grow.
That is a wonderful what's next. Giselle, thank you for joining us today and for teaching us all about what you're doing and what Goldman is doing to make a difference here.
My absolute pleasure, Dominic. Nice to see you.
And thank you to Goldman Sachs, 1 Million Black Women, for sponsoring today. Now to my colleague, Ina Fried.
I'm Ina Fried, Chief Technology Correspondent for Axios. Our final guest is the founder and CEO of the TechEquity Collaborative, Catherine Bracy, joining us from Martinez, California. Welcome, Catherine.
Hi, thanks for having me.
Definitely. It's interesting. Obviously, there have been people talking about the racial inequities in the tech industry for a long time. But a lot of the groups that have been working on this have been working on some segment outside of what is it actually like to work at these tech companies. They've been working on either recruiting more people into the industry or trying to get people to do different things outside of the industry. And I think TechEquity Collaborative, as I recall, started really as an effort to get people within technology more focused on their communities, specifically the San Francisco Bay Area. Is that right in terms of how you guys got started?
Yeah, at our beginning, we were really more focused on activating tech workers as citizens of this place, and obviously recognizing that while it's still the case, 5 years ago when we started, there was a massive housing crisis. Tech was seen as sort of the driving force for a lot of displacement and inequality in the region. And a lot of the tech workers that I knew, most of the tech workers that I knew, wanted to be part of the solution to that. They didn't want to be contributing to, the harms, their neighbors' harms. And so we built TechEquity for them to channel their civic power into efforts to make sure that as the tech industry was growing in the Bay Area, that growth was actually creating opportunities for everybody who lived here. Since then, obviously, the problems that were plaguing the Bay Area have become problems everywhere in the country as we see tech grow in places like Austin and Atlanta and Miami. So this is becoming more and more a national question. And at the same time, we're also seeing that tech platforms and business models are impacting how the economy is, how people are experiencing the economy everywhere, whether that's through workforce and labor practices or, the emerging venture-backed housing sector. So all of these aspects are now things that we're looking at in addition to just, how do these companies being based in the Bay Area affect their neighbors?
And it seems like you're still doing a lot of the work that you were doing and expanding those things. But some of the efforts now, as you mentioned, are really more focused on looking at the workers within tech and the conditions there. One of the most interesting projects that I've read about you guys doing is this effort around really looking at the different tiers of workers in tech. And most people outside the industry don't know this. For those inside the industry, it's like, of course, there's 2 tiers of workers. But outside, you just think of Apple employees or Amazon employees or Google employees. But what many people don't realize is they have this shadow workforce, as it's often called, of contractors, vendors, part-time, temporary workers. And they have really different demographics, but also really different pay. Talk about that project and what it was that made you want to make sure more people knew about what was going on.
Yeah, this is called the Contract Worker Disparity Project. And I think it's really important to talk about in the context of racial equity in the tech industry. We obviously know we were, when we started trying to work to organize the full-time, directly employed, more sort of white collar tech workers to use their power to advance an equitable economic agenda. And as we were doing that work, it became clear that there were other kinds of workers at tech companies that were not these sort of privileged, whiter, better educated, whatever, sort of stereotypical tech worker that you think of. Of course, over the last few years, we've come to understand gig economy workers, so like Uber drivers or Instacart delivery people, as a class of tech worker. But there are also people that go to work on tech campuses every day, or did before when those campuses were open, that do jobs there that are sort of second tier jobs as in terms of how they're treated by the tech company. So these are workers who perform a variety of duties from, janitorial services up to, high level software engineers, but they are actually legally employed by a third party entity and then farmed out to the tech company. This is a practice known as contracting out. I believe some companies refer to it as their extended workforce. And it's been widely reported that there are often more of these kinds of workers than there are full-time workers at tech companies. And, as I said, they're treated differently. We have done research that shows that not only are they treated differently because of labor laws and whatever else, but they are also more likely to be members of underrepresented minority groups. And we just had a paper that came out last week that really digs into this if folks are interested. And that creates this really troubling caste system that embeds racial inequities and gender-based inequities on tech campuses, where more of these workers who are in less protected, worse paying roles with fewer benefits are more likely to be members of these minority groups, whereas the full-time workforce that is often managing them or overseeing them is whiter and more male. So we've spent a year kind of digging into that issue. We're now looking at what we can do both voluntarily on the corporate side, and there are many companies who are really open to looking at how they can change their internal practices, but also on the public policy side, what needs to change in terms of labor law or whatever, in order to make sure that these workers are, that they're seen, first of all, and that we make sure that their jobs are good jobs.
And as you point out, the differences are pretty striking. So two people might be showing up to the same office building. They might be doing different jobs, but they could be, both skilled jobs. So you have, a range of different people in these roles, as you mentioned. It might be the cafeteria workers and janitors, but it also might be quality assurance and content moderation. It might be sustaining engineering, other things where the company just feels like it doesn't need to differentiate as much, but they're having a really different experience. And one of the places that shows up is in power. I mean, most of these are tied to power dynamics, but that means that even if you have more diverse people in the room, if they're part of this other workforce, they probably have less say, might be more afraid of rocking the boat, less ability to change the direction, probably none. That's one of the issues. The other is they're getting different benefits, if you will, in terms of everything from pay and healthcare to vacation. What do you think could change? What would you like to see change about the two-tier workforce? Would you like to see it just eliminated or better protections? What might be some of the answers here?
Yeah, I mean, I don't think we're trying to say to tech companies, you need to turn all of these workers into full-time employees. That's, not something we're trying to eliminate necessarily. But we do think that if they're going to contract out, that they should ensure with the vendors that they're using to provide this workforce, that those workers have a sort of equal level of protection, benefits, stability, as their full-time workforce. I feel like that's the least that they can do. And that doesn't mean that they have to be the ones that provide those benefits, but they can say, hey, look, we need to make sure that whoever we're contracting with provides the same paid holidays that our full-time workforce gets. Because we've seen instances where there are some workers who don't find out that they have Christmas off until Christmas Eve and things like that. Or we also think that there should be more stability in the jobs themselves. So a lot of these workers are working on very short-term contracts. So they may be on paper making, good money, $25 or $35 or $50 an hour, but they're only on a 2-month contract. And when you're on a 2-month contract, you can't get a lease on an apartment. You can't get a mortgage. I mean, these are all things that have to be taken into account. So we're actually coming out with a standard that corporations can use to sort of build into their contracts with these sort of temp agencies and staffing agencies that they work for, to say, hey, if we're going to contract with you, then these are the basic standards that you need to provide to the workers who are going to be coming to work at our company every day.
And might there actually be an opportunity here for an industry that says it wants to diversify its workforce? As you mentioned, their base of temporary and contract workers tends to be more representative of the population, have more people from underrepresented groups. Would you like to see programs that use those as an entryway to full-time employment, and for companies to take advantage of the fact that some of the people that they actually have coming into their own offices could be their next diverse employees?
Yeah, absolutely. And that's actually one of the things that we're going to build into this standard is saying, hey, you have a pool of talent here. You should develop programs that create pathways for those workers into full-time roles at the companies instead of just treating them as dispensable. And, I think the companies, or at least what they say, is that they're constrained by legal barriers that prevent them from offering, say, professional development to these contracted workers. But there are many ways in which they could provide sort of an inside track to hiring, or, they offer referral bonuses to their full-time staffers when they bring a friend in for an interview and that friend gets hired. I feel like there could be a referral bonus program to if a contractor comes through that channel, something like that, that really doesn't require that laws be changed. It's just, incorporating different practices that will give this pool of talent that already has experience at the company an opportunity to move into a more stable career.
I'm afraid we're going to have to leave it there. Thank you so much, Catherine Bracy, CEO and founder of the TechEquity Collaborative. Thanks for joining us.
Thanks, Ina.
Well, thank you all for joining this afternoon for another virtual conversation that hopefully has made us all a little bit smarter, faster. Thank you also to our sponsor, Goldman Sachs 1 Million Black Women, for making this event possible. For more information or to sign up for my tech newsletter, Axios Login, or to check out our Hard Truths Technology Deep Dive looking at systemic racism, visit axios.com/newsletters or check out the Axios app. Thanks for joining, and we'll see you at axios.com.